Have you either self-diagnosed yourself or been medically diagnosed with postpartum depression? Is that how you came about finding this episode? Well, I do want to talk about that today, but really my focus is going to be on postpartum anxiety. But I wanted to put postpartum depression in the mix because I feel like postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety have been lumped together in this category of postpartum depression, which kind of is an umbrella for both problems, but I don't see it that way. And that wasn't my experience. So I want to talk about that first. I'm going to talk about postpartum anxiety and how that is different than postpartum depression. And I want to touch on how both of those are being treated medically in the same way. And I don't think that that is necessarily the best way to treat people who are suffering from postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety. If you noticed, I said people, because I understand that this is something that does not just affect women, because a postpartum period for new parents or just parents of a new baby can be overwhelming. So these kind of things can be happening to men and women who are taking a primary caregiving role in a baby's life. So I want to make sure to emphasize that this doesn't just apply to women. I don't believe this is strictly a chemical thing. I think that this is a reaction to a postpartum period of time. I'm also going to tell you guys my own personal experience with postpartum anxiety. I'm going to touch on how this postpartum period leads to a feeling of overwhelmment and how that leads to a decrease in self-care, which is a contributing factor in both depression and anxiety. I'm also going to touch on sleep deprivation because that was a huge catalyst in my anxiety being extreme. And then I'm going to talk about how you can get ahead of this before the baby comes by introducing some practices into your daily life to kind of set yourself up for success, and then how to go about continuing those practices once the baby has come to make sure that you are taking care of your own mental health, because that is a priority. It's a really big one. And you can't really be a good parent if you're not in a good space yourself. Even though there's a tendency to put baby first, we have to talk about that because there has to be a balance there, because you got to be taking care of yourself. So that's the layout for today's episode on postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, self-care, and sleep deprivation. I'm Dr. Williams, and this is my podcast. I have 2 graduate degrees in psychology, am a licensed mental health counselor, and an expert in the area of spirituality. I am devoted to living my best life and am sharing it with all of you. I'm bringing my expertise, education, and life experiences to you through this podcast. Everyone deserves to enjoy life, and that is what I'm here to talk about. Depression, anxiety, grief, you name it, we all go through it at one time or another. I believe there's a better way to come at these things than mainstream mental health care offers, and I'm here to offer you my perspective and dig into discovering how you can feel good no matter what life throws at you. It is my intention to contribute goodness to this world, and the content herein is how I do that. But one disclaimer before we dive in: should you decide to apply the information offered here, be prepared for improvements in your life. You may even live happily ever after, and you'll only have yourself to thank. This is Feel Good Now, the Dr. Williams podcast. I want to talk about how medical personnel goes about treating postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety. Before I became pregnant myself, I was aware of postpartum depression. I had helped women in therapy who were suffering from postpartum depression. But I had no idea that postpartum anxiety could be a primary issue. Even if you do a little bit of research online focused on postpartum depression, you will see that anxiety is kind of wrapped up in postpartum depression. But that was not my experience. So I have to assume that other people have experienced anxiety as a primary issue over depression in a postpartum period as well. But what I found out when I decided to seek medical treatment for my anxiety in my postpartum period was that postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety, being as they are lumped into postpartum depression, are being treated in the same way. And I kind of knew this going in, since I knew that depression was really the overall umbrella diagnosis. So I knew that my midwife was going to try to prescribe an antidepressant to me. And I had decided before I even went in that I wasn't going to receive a prescription for an antidepressant. Okay, so let's talk about these medications real quick. There's something like 7 different categories of antidepressants, and they're all categorized by what they do in the brain. One of the most common ones is called an SSRI, and that stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. A lot of popular antidepressants fall into the SSRI category. And the one that my midwife tried to prescribe for me was an SSRI. And I told her I came in here and I knew I was not going to agree with taking an SSRI. I haven't yet done my episode on mental health and medications, but I'm going to, because I have a really strong position on medications in general, really, because I think that our world that we live in relies so heavily on medications for fixing problems that they're not really fixing. Really, the problem is about alignment, right? And the lack thereof. And I know that now. So I'm not an advocate for medications in most cases. And I say that to you because there's exceptions to every rule. But the reason that I'm not an advocate for medications is because I think that it just is more of a Band-Aid and it just masks the issue. But I'll get into that more when I do a full episode on the topic. So let's talk about SSRIs. That's the antidepressant category that my midwife attempted to prescribe to me. SSRIs can begin to relieve symptoms within 1 or 2 weeks, but they can take up to 8 weeks before you start feeling some relief. Now just sit with that for a minute. 8 weeks, that's 2 months. You're already overwhelmed. You are already at the end of your rope. That's what brought you into this office to seek help. And now you have to wait another up to 8 weeks before you start to feel any relief. So that was my first issue with taking an SSRI. And I knew that that was not going to help me. I was beyond that point. I needed help right now. The reason that they can take that long to start offering relief is because they have to get into your system. So you have to take them on a regular basis to start changing that brain chemistry, and then you start to feel less depressed or less anxious, because some of these antidepressants do help people relieve anxiety. Now, in a postpartum period, and this was the case for me, I was breastfeeding. I breastfed both of my kids, and I was concerned about taking a medication regularly because of my child, my infant, being exposed to the medication through breast milk. And it's true. There is a small amount of the medication that is in the mother's breast milk, which then is transferred to the infant. The way that doctors justify this is because the dangers of allowing the mother to remain in a depressed state are greater than the amount of the medication that is transferring to the infant. I'm not saying that's my position. I'm just saying that that is the position of many people who are prescribing medications to breastfeeding mothers, because their depression is debilitating and they may not be able to connect with their baby. They may not even be able to get out of bed. They aren't taking care of themselves, let alone anybody else. And to get them out of that depressive state is even more important than the risks that come along with the antidepressant medication going into the breast milk and transferring to the baby. And studies have been done. You could check the science if you want to. You know that I don't weigh heavily on science, because depending on the parameters of the study, you will find varying results. So you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt and really know what you're reading when you are receiving information through scientific studies. So keep that in mind if you do decide to do the research. So the other option, and the one that I chose to advocate for myself, was to be prescribed a benzodiazepine. And one that you may be familiar with is lorazepam. And that is the benzodiazepine that I was prescribed. But getting to that point took some convincing because my midwife did not want to prescribe me with a benzodiazepine. But given that I have a background in mental health and psychology, and I've worked with patients with anxiety and addiction, and I was able to verbalize that that's not a problem for me. And I really felt that having a benzodiazepine would help me in my specific and unique situation. So let's talk about benzos. Benzos work on the central nervous system, and they act on specific receptors in the brain. For short, they're called GABA-A receptors. What it does is it makes the nerves in the brain less sensitive to stimulation, which then kind of creates more of like a calming effect. And that's that relief from anxiety feeling that you get when you're using benzos to treat anxiety. Now, the problem with benzos, and the reason that most medical personnel do not like to prescribe them, is that it's very easy for a user to become reliant on them, dependent on them. They are addictive. Actually, you are not supposed to take a benzodiazepine for more than 4 weeks in a continuous usage period of time. You also can develop tolerance to benzodiazepines, which leads people to start taking higher doses than has been prescribed. So you can see that it can become a bigger problem than the problem it's treating. And benzodiazepines also permeate into breast milk and can be transferred to infants. So it doesn't offer a different option than antidepressants or the SSRIs. But the reason that I advocated to be prescribed a benzodiazepine was, for one, I was experiencing anxiety, not depression. And I'm not saying there wasn't a continuum there. There wasn't any kind of depression. I had my moments of tears when I was feeling overwhelmed. But ultimately, when I noticed that I was distraught, or when I was having those moments of distress, I was feeling more anxiety than I was depression. And people know this. You know how you're feeling. Only you know how you're feeling. So just because you're in a postpartum period does not mean that it's depression you're experiencing, even though that's the mainstream category for diagnosing problems in the postpartum period. I also was having really disturbing thoughts and related to my baby. I was thinking about going to check the mail and carrying him, and a tree would fall and kill him. Or I was thinking about taking him out on a boat and dropping him in the water, and I wouldn't be able to get to him in time, and he would drown. And I had no plans on going on a boat. Like, these were just intrusive thoughts about fears I was having. And I would recognize it when it was happening, and I knew that it was irrational. And I knew that that wasn't really going to happen. But these thoughts were pushing their way through, and I didn't know how to stop it. The other thing that I really liked about using a benzodiazepine was that I could receive instant relief from that feeling of anxiety and didn't have to take something long-term in order to start feeling better. And just having the bottle, just having the prescription there, knowing that it was an option, most times was enough to relieve my symptoms. Like, okay, the bottle is there. If I can't get a handle on this, I can take that. It's okay. I can do that. I can allow myself to feel relief taking the medication should I feel like I need to. And having that thought pattern allowed me to get into a better mental state so that I could feel some relief and some of the anxiety would pass. And then I wouldn't even have to take the medication. So just having it there was really a big help for me. And actually, I think I only took 3 pills out of the entire prescription the first year of my second son's life. That was when I had the worst postpartum anxiety, was with my second son. So just having it there to know that I could take the edge off and feel some relief should I decide to do that. I also liked that I could take it that way. I could just determine when things were too much and I was too overwhelmed, and I could decide to take a pill and it would be in my system for a shorter amount of time than if I was taking an SSRI on a regular basis in order to feel some relief. So those are the reasons why I advocated for myself to be prescribed benzodiazepines and not an antidepressant. But you have to consider everything when making a decision like that, because as I mentioned, there are some risks in taking benzos, big risks. You don't want to create another problem, an addiction problem, when you're trying to feel better, because now you're just piling on more to the problem that you already had. So with that said, that is what I did. And I did go the medication route when I was experiencing my postpartum anxiety. But if I could go back in time, I would do things so much differently. And that's why I'm doing this episode. Because if someone had taught me how to manage my emotions and my thoughts and my beliefs so that I could have done this in a healthy way even before the baby came. So I'm going to get into that. But first, I want to talk about self-care, because this is such an important consideration when you have a new baby around. I think that this applies to anybody who has an infant in their life now, and they are taking a primary caregiving role for that infant. So that's mothers, that's fathers, it's guardians, it's man, woman, it's anybody who is taking that role where you feel responsible for this infant. And now all of a sudden, your priorities have shifted. And that's what happened to me. As soon as I became a mother, my needs dropped down under the needs of this baby. And that's on me. I have to own that, because that was a belief that I established. And I think that a lot of people do that on default, because we view this little infant as helpless and dependent. And we take on this huge responsibility of meeting this baby's needs in every possible way. So our own self-care takes a hit, a really, really big hit. Now, you guys all know how much I love to shower, because that is my time, right? My time focused on me and my thoughts. And that's when I get inspired for these wonderful ideas that I get about the world. And a lot of these episodes stem from my shower thoughts. Well, after having a baby, I did not enjoy taking a shower. Taking a shower became such a stressful part of my day. And I know a lot of parents with new babies don't take daily showers anymore, because it's not something that's fitting into their schedule, and they just kind of let it fall to the wayside. But for me, taking a daily shower was important to me, because I can't feel like myself until I have showered. Like, I don't really feel like I can embrace the day until I've taken a shower. And I'm definitely a morning shower kind of person. But when I had an infant, now it was this stressful time where I'm going to be tied up. And if the baby needs me, what am I going to do? Because it's just me. I was a stay-at-home mom. And so it was just me there in the house with the baby, or the babies once I had 2. But if I didn't have somebody there to relieve me of my responsibility, to say, I've got the baby, you go ahead and take a shower, then I wasn't able to focus on my self-care, because I was always anticipating the baby needing something while I was tied up in the shower. And it really put me on edge when I did devote that time to self-care, because I wasn't really focused on me. I was still focused on the baby and what the baby was going to need. Letting the baby cry. So a lot of people choose to do that. They're like, you know the baby's fine. You have met all the baby's needs. The baby is dry, fed, and comfortable. So if the baby's crying, just let the baby cry. But I couldn't do that. That was not something that I could do because the sound of my baby's crying was overwhelmingly terrible to me. It just put me on edge so much that I would do anything to make the baby stop crying. And that meant me dropping what I was doing to go and offer my attention and care to the baby so that the baby would stop crying. I couldn't listen to it. I just couldn't. It was not something that I felt good about doing. It actually enhanced my anxiety. It just made it worse. Another problem along the lines of self-care with what I did wrong. This is a whole lot about what I did wrong, and hopefully that'll help all of you to do something better for you. But another thing that I did wrong was I was highly focused on doing everything right. Technically, you can't do anything wrong. You can't do it wrong and you're never done because that's how life is set up. And I understand that. So when I say that I did these things wrong, I don't really mean that. I just mean these are things that I did that helped clarify now for me as to what I could have done better. And when I say better, I mean better for my state of wellness. By nature, I'm a very type A person, and I'm a perfectionist. I like to do things right. And I do a whole lot of research on things, and I trust that knowing what works for other people could possibly work for me. So that's usually where I start. I start in researching success for others, and then I apply it in my own life, and then kind of clarify from there on what works for me specifically. So for my first son, I had this belief that I had to track every breastfeeding session that I did. You breastfeeding mamas are probably going, oh my gosh, because you know what that means. I had this app on my phone, and I would hit a start timer when I started feeding my baby on the left or the right side. It was very specific. And then I would end the timer for that side, switch him to the other side, and start the timer again, and then end the timer when the feeding was done. And I did this every single time. And that means multiple times a night I was doing this. I would wake up enough to fiddle with my phone so I could track the breastfeeding sessions. And the most ridiculous part was I was so devoted to this practice because I believed that it would be useful to me in some way, and it never was. It was just a huge stressor. That's all it was. Because I felt this strong need to do it, but there was no benefit. So I wouldn't recommend that. I think ease is always the way to go. And I will say, I did that differently with my second son because I did recognize that as a stressor, and I decided not to do that. The other self-care thing that I really struggled with was guilt. So I had a hard time leaving my baby at any time, but I really, really wanted to get away. Just getting away for even going to the store, like I just needed time away. But I had this contradicting feeling. I really, really wanted to get away, and then I would do it when I had some support from somebody, and then I couldn't wait to get back to my baby. And I didn't really enjoy my time away. And it was awful. It was like there was no relief. There was nothing that could help me feel better because either way, I had a need that wasn't being met. Would you like to have an ad-free experience? I know you probably have my intro and my outro memorized by now, and maybe you just kind of want to cut out that ad space, this one right now that you're listening to, so that you can just get all of the content of the episode. Well, if that does sound like something that you're interested in, I've put together a Patreon account, and I'm offering all of the episodes I've recorded so far without that extra stuff, so you just get the content. And I'm also going to be offering members early access to the newly released episodes. So I'll be putting those on Patreon several days before the episode releases on all the other podcast platforms. So you'll be able to listen before everybody else. You'll also get access to the Dr. Williams Pod. It's a community where we're going to be able to interact and know each other on a more personal level. I'm going to be offering some Q&As so that we can really dive into some of these topics, and you can share your thoughts and I'll share my thoughts, and we can have a dialogue going. I think that we all could benefit from that. So that's something else I'm going to be offering. In addition, I'm going to be putting together a lot of exclusive content, things that I'm working on, creative projects that I have that are only going to be available to those people who are members on Patreon. You can find the link to the Patreon in the show notes, and I'm also going to post on social media, so you should be able to find it on all of my pages there as well. I look forward to getting to know all of you guys better and engaging in some co-creating together. For now, I'll just get back to the episode. See you on Patreon. Also, in this area of self-care, something that I did, and I don't know really what motivated me to do it, but after I had my second son, I chopped off all my hair. Actually, I think I did it while I was pregnant. Before he even got here, I think I chopped off all my hair. And then I didn't feel good about it. And I don't know why I did that. And I know a lot of women do change their hair in pregnancy or after they've given birth. I would definitely be interested to research that some more. But it didn't help me to feel good about myself. This is something I did, and then it led me to not feeling good about the way I looked. But actually, I kind of stopped caring about the way I looked altogether in my postpartum period. It didn't matter to me. I was in survival mode. Like, just meeting my basic needs was a stressor for me every single day. I couldn't fold the laundry without holding a baby. I couldn't feed myself without holding the baby. Like, the baby only wanted me. And I would just get done feeding the baby and I would hand him over to my husband and he would cry. And my husband would say, he's hungry. And I'm like, well, I just fed him. Like, I just need to be me, not attached to the baby right now. And I would need that. But then I would have that thing where I can't hear the baby crying and the baby only wanted me. So then I would take the baby. And so further and further down the list, my priorities for self-care got pushed. And it really compacted and became a major issue for me. And I just kept shoving it down and focusing on what the baby needed. Another stressor for me in my period was that I was not an overproducer of breast milk. And for those of you who are overproducers of breast milk, what a gift. Because for those of us that are really trying hard to feed our baby, and you have all this anxiety and stress about not knowing if they're getting enough, it's a terrible feeling. But I had to work really hard at breastfeeding my babies. I remember when I was going through my period of postpartum anxiety with my second son, I had decided to sleep separately from my husband and share a room with the baby. So we set up a room with a king-size bed in it, and he had his bassinet and eventually the crib and everything in this one room. And I slept in there with the baby. So all night it was just me and the baby. And I was so not in a good place. I was so stressed out and I was so anxious and I was so sleep deprived that I couldn't feed him. He would latch on and try and I wouldn't get let down. I was so balled up. I couldn't get let down for him. And that was such a huge stressor for me. Breastfeeding was not an easy thing. I made it to 10 months with my first son and 1 year with my second son, literally on his birthday. I was like, we're done. I made it to a year. I'm done. And he was okay with that. Actually, he transitioned really well. They both did. But that was me putting the stress on me that I had to meet that 1 year mark because that's what's recommended. And I wasn't just listening to me and my body and my baby and finding what worked for us. So I would definitely change that should I go back and do this all again. So I touched on the sleep deprivation. This is huge. This is one of the biggest problems I had with my postpartum anxiety, I remember being so frustrated and so tired that I would dig my nails into the palms of my hands and I would scream. My husband would come into the room like, "What do you need?" Because I was so gone. I just was so tired and frustrated and I couldn't feed my baby. And it was a lot, you guys. It was really, really hard. And then I had all those intrusive thoughts on top of it. And I just felt like I was going crazy. I really did. But the reason that I chose to sleep separate from my husband was because I thought that would be better for everybody. The first time around, I stayed in bed with my husband and I would just bring our first son into bed with me to feed him and then put him back in his bassinet next to our bed. And I didn't feel like my husband was involved in any of the nightly routines, and it made me resent him. I was angry. I was the one trying to put the pacifier back in to try to make it to the next feeding. And one night we even tried to swap. And I was like, "You got to do it for one night and let me sleep." And we made it like an hour. And then we switched back because he was frustrated and I was frustrated and he didn't know what the baby needed and I did and I'd been doing it. And so then I couldn't sleep anyway. So I thought it would just be easier to remove from that situation and know that, okay, everything's on me. I've got to take care of the baby during the night, and my husband would take care of our older son if he were to wake up. And he did. And he actually did that through my pregnancy too, because I didn't have an easy pregnancy. But I think in doing that, though I know I put myself in that situation, I didn't have the emotional support. I didn't have anybody there even asking, like, is there something I can do? And I think that contributed a lot to me having the postpartum anxiety. Sleep is so important. It allows us to stop the momentum. And in my postpartum period, there was a lot of negative momentum going. I mean, I couldn't find my happy place and get into a good groove because I was so focused on my own basic needs not being met. That's the purpose of sleep. Sleep allows us to stop that negative momentum and give us an opportunity to start from a better place. But when you're not getting enough sleep and you're reminded of the problem when you're woken up by the stimulus of the problem, you go right back into that negativity and you stay there. And that momentum never really does cease enough to get you onto a positive path. So sleep, so important. So important. So I would suggest discussing that with your partner before the baby comes. And if you're doing this on your own, you've got to put your self-care high up on your priority list because you've got to be spending some time replenishing yourself so that you can be there in a healthy way for your baby. If you're doing this by yourself, you also need to start changing the way you think about how the baby is going to sleep when the baby gets here. That's huge. Actually, I think that is good advice for anybody and is part of what I want to talk to you guys about in implementing some of these things before the baby gets here. So this is kind of like advice that I would offer to myself with the knowledge that I have now, which I did not have when I brought both of my sons into the world. So these are suggestions that I would give to anybody who is expecting a baby, whether that's you giving birth to a baby or you knowing that you're going to be the primary caregiver for a baby, or if you're adopting a baby or, whatever the circumstances might be. I think that it's important to start preparing yourself on a spiritual level before the baby comes so that you can establish a good foundation in your own well-being before the baby comes. And then you have to continue to uphold those practices once the baby's here. So the first thing I would suggest is being aware of your vibration, because what you're experiencing currently is a return of the vibration that you're putting into your surrounding. That's just how law of attraction works. That which you put out, you get back. How you feel is your point of attraction. So that's why feeling good is important. And that's why I stress that so much. And that's why it's the name of this podcast series. Because the more that you can feel good, the more you are attracting that which you want. And that comes with anticipating what it's going to be like when the baby gets here. If I could go back in time and I found out I'm pregnant, I would start spending time each day focusing on what life will be like when the baby comes and holding that in a really positive place in my mind so that I can feel good about it. And in that way, I'm attracting that to be something that can come into my experience when the baby's born. When negative thoughts do come in, don't freak out. It's okay. This happens to everybody. But recognizing it and then putting a stop to it as quickly as you can so that you don't start gaining more momentum down that track of negativity. And that just comes with practice, with being aware of your thoughts and then intervening when you notice that it's going in a direction that you don't want it to go. Ultimately, what I would want myself to do differently is always anticipate wellness, because that's what you want. You want everything to be well. And I would use imagery and meditation and purposeful positive thinking about anticipating the best that it could possibly be. And that goes for all aspects of this. Holding your baby in light of wellness and imagining that your baby is healthy and happy and thriving. That's what you want. But also that you are happy and healthy and thriving with your baby. That's equally important. I think that we have a tendency to focus so much on the baby that we forget that we're a big part of that equation, and we need to hold ourselves in positive light also. Have you ever talked to somebody who's like, oh yeah, my baby is like just super easy, just the best baby? Well, that isn't necessarily that individual baby's personality. Disposition comes along with an individual entity, a soul. But babies come into the world straight from non-physical. So they already are in a state of wellness. When a soul decides to be born, they are already anticipating wellness in their journey. And easy babies are a reflection of that vibration within their environment. Just like animals, pets, they can often take on the vibration of their owners. They always say like there aren't bad dogs, there's just bad dog owners because of how they treat the dog. The dog is a reflection of that vibration. Well, babies are very similar to that. They come with their own vibration, but they also are now put into this physical environment. They just came from non-physical. Now they're in physical, and they are receiving the vibration that's around them. So knowing that, you have to realize what it is you are imposing onto the baby based on your own vibrational offering. In respect to sleep, I would suggest anticipating that your baby is going to sleep incredibly well. You can even visualize yourself bragging to other parents about how your baby sleeps better than anybody could have expected. I have a friend. She has 3 kids. And her youngest is 3 months old, and all of her babies slept well. They were good sleepers. And that's because she anticipated it being that way. She expected her babies to be good sleepers. When you set that intention for your baby, that's a vibration. You're offering that vibration, and your baby is receptive to your vibration. So when my friend anticipated her baby sleeping well, even if it didn't happen right at first, and she maintained that vibration, that intention, the baby then matches up with that. So start that early. I would start that in that period of time before the baby comes, and you can just focus on what that's going to be like when the baby's here and the baby sleeps so well, and you're able to brag about it, and you're getting a full night's sleep, and everybody's happy. The baby's easy. The baby's happy. The baby's always smiling and playful, and you're just so in love with your baby. You have no room for any negativity because everything is going so well. And visualize that and imagine it. Write it down, script about it. Just do a creative writing session all about how your baby is the perfect baby for you. Do the creative work. That's where I went wrong. I got into a state where I was anticipating a disturbance. I was always on edge, waiting for that disturbance to come, where then I couldn't maintain my wellness because I couldn't focus on my own needs. I would have to drop whatever it was that I was needing at that time so I could tend to my baby. I was anticipating that. That was a vibration that I was offering. And unknowingly, obviously, I didn't mean to do that, but I didn't know then what I know now. I would do that differently now. I would do the creative work. The other thing, and this is probably the most important thing, meditate. Meditation alone will improve, it improves everything. It really does. It improves everything. It's the best advice I could give to anybody. Just meditation in my life has put me in a state of allowing, even without doing anything else. And that's huge, because when you stop your thought, when you take the 15 to 20 minutes to not think, to lower resistance, to get that out of the way, you're putting yourself in a state of receiving all that you desire. In there are all those things that come with the postpartum period that you want to have. So really, meditation is all you need to do, because the more you are able to lower your resistance, the more you are going to bring those things that you want into your experience. So that is really the number one practice I could say to anybody to incorporate into your daily life. You may think that you can't find 15 to 20 minutes on some days, but you can, and you will, and you'll start looking forward to it once you start doing it. You don't even have to take me at my word. I know that me saying this to you is not going to convince you of it. You doing it is going to convince you of it. If you successfully are able to stop your thoughts for even a minute within that 15 to 20 minutes, it's going to start bringing positive experiences into your life. And the more you do it, the more you'll see it. Say you're a stay-at-home guardian for a baby. Your whole day is just following the pattern of whatever the baby needs. I get that. I've been there twice. But if I were to do this again, even though I was so tired and sleep deprived, as soon as I got a moment to sleep, like when the baby was sleeping, I napped. I napped a lot. But now, if I were to go back and do it, I would take 15 minutes to meditate before napping, because it's that important. Sleep is important too, because it stops momentum. It puts you in like a neutral state. But when you're meditating, you are deliberately opening up that gateway to allow things into your experience. And even better than meditation is appreciation. So if going through your day, you're able to find things to appreciate and truly feel thankful for it, truly, you have to have the feeling. If the feeling doesn't back up the thought, it doesn't work. But if you can find something, and even in those moments of joy with your baby, when you're not feeling anxious or depressed or overwhelmed or stressed, because there's good stuff in there too, in those moments, you're opening up that pathway to good things coming into your experience. The idea is to be focused and doing those things more often than you're not. But meditation is definitely something that I would suggest doing, and start that before the baby comes. Get in that routine and really start to see how it works in your life, because then you'll already be on board with prioritizing it once the baby is here. The other thing I would suggest is using your supports and your resources. I think a lot of us feel like the baby is all my responsibility and I have to do everything. But people really do want to help, and people really do love holding a baby. So let them help you. You might have to do the asking at first, but when somebody loves you, they will start offering to help you. They just have to know that you're receptive to it. and they don't want to intervene. It's your baby. They don't want to step on your toes. They want to make sure that if they're helping, it's something that you want. The other thing I would suggest is knowing yourself and knowing how to advocate for yourself. So let's say you've already had your baby and you haven't been able to do all these things that I'm suggesting working up to the baby coming. You're already depressed. You're already anxious in your postpartum period. You're already at the end of your rope. It's okay to seek help for that. It's okay, even if that means medication, because that on the short term can make a big difference. It did for me. Just having the medication made a big difference for me. But be able to advocate for what it is you need. If you know this is anxiety, not depression, and you think that you want to get treated for anxiety and not depression, you got to say that. Because I did, and I was able to get the care that I needed. But make sure you know yourself. You have to weigh the risks and the benefits and know what it is that's best for you. And you know this stuff. You do know what's best for you. Even if it's not at the forefront, tune into who you are. Do a meditation session and ask for guidance. As it is now, I can ask for guidance at any point in my day, and within the next couple minutes, I receive the answer I was asking for. My alignment has gotten to the point where I trust it more and more every day because I'm seeing it work for me. And again, I know that hearing those words isn't going to convince you, but if you guys start doing this, you will be convinced on your own through knowing yourself. Your own alignment will prove it to you. The last thing I would say is, if possible, don't wait for things to get really bad before you start addressing it. Before the baby comes, if possible, look to your supports or your partner, somebody who can offer you some kind of support in you taking some time to focus on you once a week, where you get to go and do something without the baby or without the kids to be able to decompress when it's just you and your thoughts. So if you can set that up before the baby comes and start going and doing something on a weekly basis, it's up to you on how often you want to do something based on what you need. For me, weekly would have made a big difference. I think if I had a weekly time where I went out with my sister or my girlfriends or my mom, or my mom watched the baby and I went out with my husband, I could see a lot of benefit in that. I think that maybe I wouldn't have felt so guilty when I was leaving because I would have established that early on and I would have gained some momentum with the benefits that come from having that time set aside to focus on what is important, me focusing on me and what I need. I also think it's important to have daily time. If you have a partner who's helping you raise this baby or your kids, even if that is just the 15 or 20 minutes for you to go and meditate or take a shower or whatever helps you to de-stress, daily time devoted to you is important. And you deserve that. You are worthy of that. You don't have to take on all of the responsibility. You are important. Your health and your wellness is important. And it's important to your baby and to your spouse and your partner and your other kids and your other relationships. So it's okay to ask from those people for the support so that you can do that. If a disturbance does happen in your daily activity, say you're in the shower, since that's something I relate with, and the baby starts crying, instead of having a meltdown, instead of that being the tipping point, just don't resist, okay? Just accept it for what it is and try to go with the flow, because that's going to allow a better vibrational environment for things to turn around and offer you some more positive experiences. The moment that you resist and dig your heels in, you're attracting more of the things that will make you resist and dig your heels in. So do yourself a favor and do your best to not resist the disturbance and just go with it. And remind yourself of this truth. Everything is working out for me. Because it is. Whether you realize it in the moment or not, it's all working out for you all the time. That concludes this episode, but if you don't want to wait for the next episode to come out, I have more for you at drwilliamspodcast.com. You can learn more about me and my journey to podcasting, find all the ways to connect with me on social media, and there's a button to subscribe so you're the first to know what's new and upcoming. You also can shoot me an email at hello@drwilliamspodcast.com. You are so special to me, and your support does not go unnoticed. I want to support you too. This podcast is my outlet for growth because when you teach something, you hold yourself accountable and apply the information in life. But the inspiration for these episodes comes in a variety of ways, and one of those is through you. I want you to feel like this is your show too. So send me a message and let me know which episode is your favorite and why. And tell me if there's a topic you'd want to hear me talk about. Your feedback applies to so many people, and your suggestion could change someone's life for the better. The best way to do this is by subscribing to the show and leaving a review through your favorite podcast platform. I really listen to you guys, and this dialogue feeds my soul. You say that you're a fan of me, but truth be told, I am a fan of yours. Everything is working out for each of us, and we're all in this together.